My first guest tonight, you've heard her talk about all of her food projects on her radio show, In My Backyard. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lisa Bralts-Kelly. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's great. So you have this radio show. You've had it for a little while now. You said you had 39?
39 segments.
39
so
segments.
that comes out to about a year and a half, maybe a little more.
That's great. How did you get started with this?
These segments are on WILL, and they air every other week on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month. And doing radio like that, those kinds of stories, like This American Life type stories, you know, like everyone, or I, you know, who wouldn't want to be Ira Glass and like, you know, do that kind of journalism. But I never really had an outlet for those kinds of things. But I was at a meeting at WILL one day, and the director of agricultural programming, his name is Dave Dickey. You've heard him on WILL if you listen at all. He's like, "Good Thursday morning to you," you know, like that. that guy. He's the ag programming guy. And after this meeting was over, it was something completely unrelated. It was work related. He said, "Could you come out to my office? I need to talk to you about something." And I'm like, what could I possibly have done? I haven't said any cuss words at this meeting. I haven't. But when I went up there, he asked me if I would be interested in producing radio segments about whatever I wanted, as long as it had something to do with local food or local food projects. And that's an area of interest for me. So I started doing that.
Tell us what type of things you usually cover on this show.
I cover all kinds of things. Sometimes I actually go to my neighborhood a lot looking for things, because I happen to live in a neighborhood with a lot of people who raise chickens. So I've talked about raising poultry. In Urbana, I've talked about gardens. I had a neighbor who had an old dishwasher on her back porch and decided to make a meat smoker out of it. So I went over and recorded
Sounds like
her.
my type of recycling.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I went over there and recorded all of this noise that she was making trying to build this smoker. So that was really good. And just any kind, you know, but sometimes I do some non-weird stuff too, you know, where we held a seed swap and I covered that. And I'm always looking for people doing unusual things, especially around growing their own food.
Yeah. You talk about how what goes into chickens and canning and that sort of thing. And earlier you were telling me that you kind of consider it like indie food, kind of like indie music.
Like indie music. And just, I think, being able to kind of take control over what you eat and learning these skills is really important. You know, my mom, when I was getting into canning or raising chickens or stuff like that, gardening, she's like, "Why are you're doing everything the hard way?" And I'm like, I think it makes sense to kind of be connected to how all that works. So there are some things I don't do anymore. I don't have chickens anymore, for example. When I went back to work full time, they were too hard for me to kind of keep an eye on. You know, I wanted to be a good steward of my birds, and it wasn't really happening. But
chickens take a lot.
They do and they don't. They're stupid, and so they get into a trouble. I mean, I had a chicken die in our backyard coop because she was sitting down for too long in a sunbeam, and she was so like, you know, she couldn't get up to get a drink of water, and she passed out and died, basically. And so,
well, I think we've all done.
Her name was Julia Child. Yes, her name was Julia Child, the chicken. So we didn't eat her. People always ask me that. We did not eat her. We buried her and gave her a proper chicken burial. But when you're not home all day to make sure they're not being taken away by hawks, which has happened in our neighborhood, or we also, having poultry and gardens seems to attract, they're always around. Raccoons and possums, no matter where you live, are there. They're there. They're just waiting for the opportunity. And once there's chickens in the neighborhood, they seem to come out. And raccoons, like, if you put a combination lock on your chicken coop, they could probably twist the dial. I mean, they're really crafty. You have to really be careful. And we've had some issues with that, just other people in the neighborhood. So I did not want to have to be responsible for taking care of chicken death when I got home from work. So after the last chicken died, I said, I think we're done for a while.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what is it that got you interested in this whole thing, the whole kind of food movement?
I think for me it was having kids. You know, I moved here from Chicago and in 1996, so I've been here for a really long time. And my son was approaching 4 years old, and so I was really interested in food, and like I didn't realize that all these poisons were put on food and animals were fed bad things, and then they became food later. So that was part of it. And then, but I was working full time. I worked for Parasol Records for a couple of years, and then I had another baby, and then I was home with them all the time, and I was like, well, you know, I grew, the first garden I ever grew was like 2 tomato plants and 3 pepper plants, and I felt like Mother fucking earth. I felt like I had coaxed food out of the ground, and I was full of wind. And as if anybody here gardens, you know, like, I mean, now I have like 9 raised beds, and I grow asparagus and apple trees and stuff like that. But I was totally hooked. But I wasn't interested in using they call them traditional now, like fertilizer and all that stuff. When really it's not traditional at all. It's just the last 60 years. But I was interested in doing things the hard way, like my mom said. So even after I went back to work full time, I sort of channeled my interest in those kinds of things into telling stories about them and writing about them, as opposed to actually doing them, because they do take some time. You kind of have to pick and choose what you want to do. So
it takes a lot of time to do this stuff. How do you kind of make that time with family and career?
I think you have to pick what you want to do. I mean, if you want to have the urban homestead, if you have kids and you're working full time, you're not going to be able to like butcher the chickens and make the pickles and start the sourdough and knit the clothes. I don't know. You're not going to be able to do all that. So, there's some things that are still really important to me. Gardening is by far the most important thing to me. So every year, without fail, we have a massive garden that gets completely beyond my control by usually the end of July, and then I stop caring about it. But I'm really into it. I start all my seeds in February inside, and it's like this whole, I'm sure like the police in Urbana drive by the houses in our neighborhood, and they're like, what? We better investigate what's going on in these basements, because all these grow lights are on in people's basements.
In that part of Urbana, you probably should investigate.
Yeah, well, maybe my part's kind of the same, I don't know. But so the garden thing is really important to me, but I think if you're really busy, it's good to kind of pick 1 or 2 things. I mean, people do have time to cook. They do have time to make bread. It's just we spend a lot of time on the internet or watching Netflix or whatever, and don't realize that, we could spend an hour preparing food and be better off for it. So, but I'm just as guilty as anybody else. I take the easy way out sometimes too.
Sure. I'll do. So, like, if someone is interested in, like, starting their own garden or raising chickens or pickling, like you were saying, like, what do you think the best thing for them to do would be?
Well, we have a lot of really good resources in the community. I mean, the first thing that anybody would do is consult the great God Google and ask Google your questions. Google can answer a lot of questions, but actually, Common Ground Food Co-op often has a lot of really sort of introductory type classes about how to do things. I see some co-op represented out there in the audience. So they have classes from everything about like how to start your garden, how to make certain types of food, how to whatever. I mean, there's always something new. So that's a good resource. I would say sometimes we try to have some educational stuff out at the farmers market, which I run that. That's my day job. But I would say, we have some good resources close to home, and the co-op is really a great place to ask questions, because the people who work there have incredibly varied interests and know a lot, way more than, say, me. I go to them saying, so, you're making kombucha, how do you do that? And then I put them on the radio.
Yeah.
So.
It's nice that way you kind of learn as you're actually producing the show.
Well, I find out amazing things when I'm talking to people, and then I will get really interested in what they're doing. And like making cheese. This was something I had never tried to do, and I was around Brian McKay, who is the owner of Art Mart over there in the mall. He makes his own mozzarella and burrata cheese, and it was fascinating.
Yeah. So then you talked to him for a little while, and you all of a sudden have another project to do.
Right. It's something that I can try at home to add to my list of things. But and also I really like talking to people like him, because cheese making has really interesting sounds. There's squishing, there's water, and when you're doing radio, sound is really important. I mean, if it's just me talking, it's really boring. But, and actually I will never listen to radio the same way ever again. You know, once I started doing this, I found myself listening to all the, even the boring NPR money segments. You know, they have interviews with people, and I have learned a lot just from listening to other radio.
Yeah, yeah. So your show has been on a little break, right? Because
yes.
The winter.
I'm on hiatus in January.
And you're coming back early February?
February 9th. And then that's the second Thursday of the month, so then it'll be like the 9th and then whatever the fourth Thursday is.
So do you mind giving us a little bit of a preview, like what's going on in your garden right now?
Well, right now nothing, because even though it's been like an atypical winter, I don't have a lot going on. So right now what I'm doing is looking through seed catalogs and trying to figure out, you know, trying to keep my tomato order to under 20 different kinds of plants. I have no reason to grow 20 different kinds of tomatoes. Actually, no one really has any reason to grow 20, but they all look so good. They're there, and now with heirloom varieties, these kind of old-time varieties coming back, there's pink tomatoes, there's green tomatoes, there's yellow, white, you know, striped tomatoes. There's all different kinds, so they all look good. And there's little ones and big ones and long, skinny ones. I mean, it's crazy. So I'm going through seed catalogs right now, and I'll probably start my seeds sometime after I get the order, sometime in the next few weeks. Try to keep my cats from eating all the seedlings for a couple months until they get big enough. And we'll plant out sometime in March. It really depends on the weather. So I'm really looking forward to that. But I also interviewed a couple farmers, people that you buy, if you go to the farmer's market, people that you buy food from, and interviewed them about their seed ordering process, because I'm fairly certain it's a little different from mine. Since they're, you know, farming many, many acres, so.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that sounds great. So you said February 9th, you'll be coming back on in my backyard. What time does it?
2:22 p.m. on WILL AM 580, the AM station. But they also are all archived and are on the internet at the WILL site. If you click on the agriculture tab and in my backyard, it'll take you to all 39 pieces. You can stream them on your computer. You can download them to your computer if you really want to. If you want to hear them over and over again. So even if you don't hear it on the air, you can catch it on the web. And actually, in exchange for tightening up my writing, because like we're talking now, I tend to go on when I'm writing as well. My pieces run long, and they told me if I can get them down to like about 4 minutes, then they will air them during morning edition, which is like totally awesome, because it will reach a completely different audience instead of like a bunch of guys on their tractors. Because everybody I know, when the farm report comes on in the middle of the day, they turn it off. They do something else for an hour until the world comes on at 3 o'clock or whatever. But a lot of people listen in the morning, so I'm kind of excited about maybe reaching a different audience. But first I have to kind of tighten up my writing, and I don't know. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much for having a beer.
Thank you for having me. It's been delightful. Thank you.
Good.